Good
Hello.
evening, or good evening, or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And welcome to We Need to Talk About Sunday, where we talk about last Sunday's service or other things that have been going on at Romsey Methodist Church. I am Jason,
And I'm Joe.
and we are joined this evening by Tizz,
Hello.
who has a different name if you read his name on the plan, but I'm sure I'll explain that in a minute. Who led Sunday's service, which was our first Sunday in Advent, and we looked at the theme of Mary's song. So just say Mary's song, because we looked at the Magnificat, the of Luke that's called the Magnificat, and also called Mary's song. But I should say that every week of Advent up until Christmas, because that's what Advent is, every week of Advent it will be a different song. So we're doing different songs each week. I thought I should flag that. But yeah, so this week was Mary's song. And yeah, thanks for joining us, Tizz. Joe is going to give you some questions, I guess.
Yeah.
Well. Yeah.
Well, we'll dive in, Tizz. I was going to... Yeah.
No,
go on, Jace. What's happened?
We've not done this for a while. It's been a fail. I was going to say, do you want to introduce yourself, Tizz?
Yeah.
As well?
Yeah.
You've not said anything yet. So.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. So I prefer the name Tizz, although I suspect on the plan it said Mark Tizzard, because that is my proper name. My mum likes me to be known as that. And I live not that far from Romsey, I suppose. I live just the other side of Southampton. I live in a place called Waltham Chase, and we've been here for about 21 years. So, yeah. And I grew up in and around Swanwick on the River Hamble. So I've not travelled massively far in my life in some ways. So there you go.
You mentioned it on Sunday, Tizz, but do you want to give us your title again and a little bit more as to what that might mean?
Yeah, so I work for the Southampton Methodist District, and my job title is I am the intergenerational mission enabler for the circuits of the Southampton Methodist District. So,
have you got a card?
So I have. It's more of a compliment slip size. I think the Methodist Church quite likes long job descriptions. Actually, I've seen some others that are equally long. And the irony of me, there's several bits to this question. So I guess about 5 years ago, the district up until then had a district youth officer, which is a more traditional role within the life of a district. That lady, Nicola, candidated and was successful, and she's now an ordained Methodist minister. And at that time, I was a youth worker in a church. And I assumed that at some point Nicola's job would come up and a new district youth officer would be imagined and all that kind of stuff. But that didn't happen. And what actually happened was the Southampton district started to rethink about what it wanted to do around youth work and children's work, and dreamed up a role called of intergenerational mission and that kind of topic. I didn't know this, but my superintendent at the time was involved in those conversations, because at my church, which is still my church, we had started to have conversations in the previous 3 or 4 years around intergenerational ministry. So I applied for a job I didn't think I would get, because who would want to employ anybody from the Meon Valley in terms of Methodism? But here I am. It's an interesting marriage of stuff. Yeah, so that's what I do. I kind of do that, and I guess a bit like Sunday when I came to Romsey, part of my role is to maybe facilitate some conversations around intergenerational stuff, but also to demonstrate, like I tried to do on Sunday, how not to do intergenerational worship, and then and all that kind of stuff, and then let others obviously develop that a bit more. Yeah. So I take my job really seriously. I take my job really seriously. I just don't take myself very seriously. To be honest, I do think actually the future of the church is in returning to a more intergenerational feel. If you go back to one of the classic verses in the Old Testament, or chapters rather, in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 6, where you have the great awakening of the idea there's a mono God. You also have this sense about the people, the family, talking about faith on the road, in the home, in the workplace, in all of this stuff, not just in the synagogue. And we need to redevelop something of that, I feel. Anyway, so that's what I try and do.
Very good. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming, Tizz.
So that was probably a really long answer.
No, that was great. It was great. Really good. Well, I mean, obviously, Jason's already said that we were looking at Mary's song on Sunday, but and we usually kind of ask this on the podcast of the preacher. If you miss Sunday's service and you really can't be bothered to go back and watch, could you describe it in a few sentences? What what's the crux? What's the takeaway message?
Well, I think so Mary's song, Luke chapter 2, it's an interesting, really powerful piece of writing and reflection. We have a teenage unmarried mum to be working out what that looks like for her. How does she cope with the fear of the unknown? I think anybody who's ever been a parent in that expectancy stage, you have no idea what's coming, right? And those of us who have managed to go the other side of that and have children, you realize just how little you knew, even when you thought you didn't know much anyway. So there's that bit, I think, of her writing, but also this incredible, fierce woman, like not necessarily like that she was determined to do what she thought God had called her to do. So she is fierce in the face of that fear, I think. So, I think she is an amazing person. Obviously, a lot of us on the Protestant side of Christianity, I didn't say this on Sunday, but are slightly nervous of the Mary character. And particularly males, I think, are nervous of the Mary character. So one of the things I did talk about was I was one of the least appropriate people to talk about Mary, being a middle-aged, balding man against a teenage pregnant woman. So, but there is a lot we can learn from her, I think.
You say that in the Magnificat Mary song, there's you say that she's quite fierce. Are there any particular bits that kind of jump out at you that kind of give you that sense, or the other thing that you said, that sort of impending, not doom, that's the wrong word, but that kind of nervousness about what she might be feeling as well? Is there something in the text that kind of made you really think, oh yeah, okay, that's what gives me that impression? I suppose I could ask you too, Jason.
I think there's actually, sorry, I said Luke chapter 2, didn't I? I didn't mean Luke chapter 2, I meant Luke chapter 1. I don't know why I said 2. But it is a challenge for us as we read that to see how just the tone that she gives about, for me, in this is my lot, this is what I've sensed, this is the angel, she's working out what the angels told her, and she produces a really powerful thing. So for me, that's the fierceness, is that she writes or produces. I don't suspect she actually wrote it in the way that we might write an email with it in, or whatever. I'm not sure what key she chose to sing it in, or whatever, but she does produce something that then gets turned into this piece of writing, and I think that's amazing. That's what that. So rather than, there are bits, but for now, I'll settle on that really.
That's nice. Yeah. Jason, anything to throw in about that?
No, not really. I mean, I guess it's interesting how it's not. I guess the song is quite it's national and global in scope, isn't it? And it's very big language she's using. I'm just got it up here about and talking about sort of Israel and these kind of big, national ideas of what God is up to. And I thought it's quite interesting how that is quite juxtaposed to the kind of very small backwater situation they're going to find themselves in, or they find themselves that they do find themselves in. That it's a very interesting kind of, they're going to travel on maybe on the back of a donkey, but they're going to have to travel miles and stay in a stable somewhere under a house or whatever. But then there's this, Mary gets it. Mary gets how big a deal this is. But it's that's just really interesting to me, that bit, I guess.
And I guess we're so used to, like, even today, looking for things from the rich and the powerful, or the celebrity or whatever, and yet she recognizes she's a lowly servant girl. She doesn't see her status in herself, but she sees the status that she gets from what God is doing.
Yes, yeah.
And I guess for all of us, I mean, I think we can all sometimes have imposter syndrome, or we can feel inadequate, we can feel whatever. So I think that there's that, she holds on to that sense of calling, destiny in a fierce way. Like, I'm not letting go of this. And as we know, with the life of Jesus, that was not always going to be dead certain easy for her to do.
Do you think that sort of, although we kind of get this imagery of sort of her being quite strong and fierce, as you say, do you think that there was an element of sort of worry about sharing it with, sharing the news with Joseph particularly, and thinking about what his thoughts might be? How do you think she might have sort of faced that conversation? Because surely, it would have taken a lot for him to believe her.
Yeah, it's interesting. She doesn't pick up. I don't get that sense in this particular passage that she deals.
Sorry,
with
I'm jumping ahead a little.
No, that's fine. But there is this backstory, isn't there? There's also Joseph, but there's also Elizabeth in there. There's this sense, and I think the visit to Elizabeth is particularly empowering as well. That meeting an older woman. We don't really know how old Elizabeth's probably younger than me, so still a youngster, really. But there's that moment when the two babies in the womb meet, and we understand that John, who we now know is John the Baptist, does a somersault in the stomach, in the womb, and all of that kind of stuff. So then the Joseph part of the story is interesting. There's a whole load of social etiquette and social culture that would have been pushed out in that, not necessarily. She would be aware that would not be an easy conversation. I can imagine anyway. I can't think of, maybe in our culture today, maybe something like coming out, or telling your parents you're transgender, or something like that, which again, maybe we're getting slightly better at those conversations, but it's still very edgy kind of conversation.
Bit taboo, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, or talking about death maybe is another thing we're not very good at talking about.
Do you think that I guess it's completely hypothetical, really, but what was likely to become of Mary if Joseph hadn't have stuck around with her in that situation?
Well, I think in her day, that could have been very challenging for Mary. And actually, culturally, Joseph would have been seen to be in the right with that decision. Now, you could argue about whether he would morally be in the right, but actually, if the child wasn't Joseph's, as we believe, or I believe, then actually that he had some moral. He had all sorts of ethical and moral things to weigh up.
So would Joseph have lost some street cred by sticking with by Mary? Street cred's obviously not the right word, but
yeah. Well, I think. I'm sorry, Jason. Sorry.
Well, so you don't know what was said outside of, like, we've got the text, and this is all written in retrospect as we have it. It's not. We don't know all the conversations that went on and that kind of thing, and it could, who knows? But I guess the thing is, it's important to bear in mind that God is choosing the parents for his son, or the adoptive parents of his son, which is something you don't get to do, but God is choosing from everyone, and he is choosing people that are righteous in God's eyes, not necessarily in the eyes of the culture at the time or anything like that. So we talk about how would she feel coming to Joseph. Well, actually, maybe she knows something about Joseph in his character and who he is that God knows about Joseph and his character and who he is, and is the reason why they're in that situation there. So I think it's I think we can get a bit too hung up on how shameful it would have been, and there's certainly something to bear in mind from that wider. But to kind of infer anything on the relationship between the two of them, I think it's really, really hard. And I think the fact that he does well. You mentioned before we started talking, Tizz, that he stays around for a bit, doesn't he? That's the interesting thing, is that he's quite absent later on in the text.
And as far as I can remember from my reading around that, nobody's really 100% certain of what happens to him, whether he dies or whether he vacates the scene altogether. We're not sure what that's about. We understand that Jesus had other siblings, so the relationship that we assume carried on and we know that when Jesus got lost in the temple, or maybe didn't get lost, maybe he wanted to stay in the temple and the parents went home, or that scene, we know Joseph and Mary were together then. But after that, he's large, and we know that Jesus was known as a son of Joseph the carpenter, so there are some links to him. But yeah, I agree with Jason there. I see that if God, the Mary and Joseph weren't accidental characters in this story, they were deliberate characters in this story. But like all of us, Joseph and Mary had free will. So although it was ordained by God, there is always this question about ordained on one hand and free will on the other, isn't it? So I can't get my fingers in the right bit on the screen, but they keep disappearing. So how does that work? How do So yes, I agree. The character of both of them, Mary and Joseph, is really important in the character of Jesus, humanly, and so but they because they also had free wills and they chose to stay together, chose to be the parents that Jesus needed.
And I think sort of Mary always chose to be sort of committed to being honest about it, and being truthful as to, who Jesus was. She obviously from the text that we read on Sunday, she was completely clear as to what was happening in her, and I think, as far as I know, everything that we see in Scripture from that moment onwards, Mary sticks with that. She is absolutely 100%. I mean, yeah. Why wouldn't you be? I suppose. You've had a couple of angels come to you. You've given birth. Everything's come true. Sort of thing. But I suppose she is his longest advocate, if that makes sense. Yeah.
But I wonder as well, because I think one of the interesting things is there's no, to an extent, like loads of this is kind of normal emotion, like for anyone that's having a child, right? They think the world of their kids and and the life that's coming, and and want the best for them and all that kind of stuff. And I guess there's a sense in this that, as well as being super special, it's actually very normal and speaks to an experience that loads of people can relate to in some way, not just that God coming to be with us, but how we do understand that process and emotional. We can understand some of that emotion when we have children and that kind of thing. So it's reading it now is I guess the first time I've read this as a parent. I read it very differently to how I did before, and can relate very differently. And now I sort of think, well, I kind of think that my son's a big deal. So it's an interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I was reading sort of earlier about this idea of that. Mary was kind of sort of wrestling with two sorts of opposite emotions. This idea of sort of the fear of the situation, especially sort of. I guess that's quite the sort of humanistic point of view, isn't it? She's sort of quite concerned as to what might happen physically, I suppose, but also that fear of what. Of being judged by Joseph, by others, and all of that. And so this idea of fear, but also the opposite of this sort of obedience and devotion that she has chosen. That she's and it seems like that. Obviously, the text is just overwhelming sort of gladness, really, that kind of spills out, and you sort of lose all the any sense of fear that she might have had. Seems to have sort of been eclipsed almost. Maybe that's not absolutely true, but for that moment it does seem as though she's Jason,
sorry, I've just had a thought. So obviously Luke's writing, this is just totally off the top of my head, and I've never really thought about that. So Luke's writing in like Roman times, Roman society. It's like a big deal in Roman households was that the father of the child at the birth had to they were given sort of so many days or something, and then the father would come in and kind of decide whether or not they were keeping the child after the child was born, and then he would either kind of say, yes, this is my son, I will, or daughter, we'll keep them, or no, get rid of them. And I wonder what's interesting about this is we don't get that, do we? There's not that. There's not a hint of that being the way things are going to be. And I wonder how, because from what I've read before about it, it was more ceremonial than it was like that kind of thing. But it still happened. It's still a big deal. But yeah, the absence of Joseph in those kinds of that kind of situation makes you sort of think, well, is this a way of saying, no, this isn't the way that God operates? This isn't, Mary's going to do this. This is happening, kind of thing. And to an extent, well, it's not, it's not even up to Joseph. It's, this is, I don't know. It just came to me.
Yeah.
The second half of the reading, in a sense, is moves slightly away from the direct birth narrative, or the like Jason was saying, about his expression, his son is special and important. And like you were saying, any parent would say the same. You'll have such high hopes. But the second part of the reading, from verse 50 onwards, about she shows an awareness of the story of Israel and the story of the people really well, and God's redemption. He in verse 50, he's shown mercy from generation to generation to all who fear him. So that's on the positive side. She by implication, then those who don't fear him maybe don't have the mercy in that sense. And if you, in my simple mind, when you look at the history of Israel and the people, when they're closer to God, they're redeemed, and then as they grow, their relationship with God grows cooler, they then maybe end up in a less than ideal situation and need a savior character to come in. So she is also putting in some quite interesting theological reflection, which for a lowly servant girl is also very interesting, I would think. And I was looking at slightly different, but if you read the very last few verses of Malachi, so the last few verses of the Old Testament, you have quite a stark image presented there, and she speaks somewhat into that scenario as well as what this baby she's carrying will bring. So it'd be interesting to know exactly how lowly a servant girl. Perhaps I don't know the answer to that, but she seems to have grasped a lot of stuff in that.
Yeah.
One of the things I was wondering then, because I don't know, it could be wrong. Is that supposed to be? Is that normalizing? I guess is that supposed to be normative? That from this point on, or in fact, perhaps throughout all the Bible, and they just never got it right. That it's not about the priests and the temple and all, the kind of the religious stuff, that actually any girl in any backwater town can have a not just, I guess, a meaningful relationship with God, but can grasp the fullness of the theology, what it all means, what it's all about, what faith means from this point onwards, I guess. I don't know.
I would, there's definitely some of Paul's writing about the things the educated think and the wise think. I've made an easy way. So there is a sense in that's a developing theology in the Old Testament, in the New Testament rather, that we have access to the King of Kings from wherever we are. So yeah, I would see that. But then maybe that Deuteronomy 6 passage indicates that maybe that family of faith thing, passing the story on from generation, she refers to from generation to generation. If you also the Psalms have a refrain in them, tell the story from generation to generation. So
yeah. We've talked about that on here before, about sort of the family being the center of faith. For a better word.
Can I ask a slightly more general question, kind of moving away from Mary's song slightly, Tizz, but I'd just like to get your thoughts basically of Advent, kind of generally. What do we gain by what do we have to gain by reading the Christmas story another year round? We hear it every year. Surely we know it now. Surely we can recite Luke off by heart. No, but what's the point of recapping the nativity story?
Well, yes. I mean, if you look at the four Gospels, you have in the Synoptic Gospels in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you have the nativity story in forms, but you have it there. John's very simple with the nativity story. It doesn't really have the shepherds, and it doesn't have Mary, and it doesn't have Joseph, and it doesn't have a stable, and it definitely doesn't have a donkey. And we won't dwell on whether there was or wasn't a donkey, because I don't want to
the debates,
the theological dynamite of that particular scenario. But so it is an interesting thing. I remember, just stepping even further back, if I may, for a moment. I remember being, as a young guy, coming to faith and exploring what faith looked like in my teens at school, when I was only a Tuesday Christian, because I only went to a thing on a Tuesday night, not even a Sunday. I wasn't even cool enough to go to church. And so being told, I've been reading the Bible for 40 years and I'm still finding new things in there. And I was thinking my O-level physics book is thicker than the Bible, and I have to know that by next summer. Yes. So, like, why? And now, as somebody who's been reading the Bible for 40 years, I can say I discover new things each time I read it. So there's that general answer that we can in some ways think we know the story, but there are layers to stories that maybe we pick out. And as maybe Jason said earlier, his experience of reading Mary's song after being a father, as opposed to before being a father, it
Different
illuminates different parts.
Yeah.
But I tend to find, for me anyway, the Advent, I tend to find 1 year I will concentrate on one aspect of the Advent story. And this year, probably going to be Mary, because I started to look at her, believe it or not, in preparation for Sunday morning. I didn't just rock up and do that totally off the cuff. So for me, there's that journeying with somebody, whether it be Mary, whether it be a shepherd, maybe. So that kind of stuff. But as I think I said on Sunday, for me, the idea that Emmanuel, that God is with us, is such a powerful, revolutionary thought, concept, that it is well worth examining.
I think
getting the grasp of that.
I that was a sentence that kind of stuck with me actually from Sunday, was specifically that God recognized that we can't get to heaven. He comes to us in order for us to get to, I think that
we can't tip the scales in our favor by what we do. We can never be good enough. We can never do enough. We can't. Right will I don't believe can ever cancel out our wrongs in that sense. There is always mark left. So we need somebody who I believe is Jesus to come and deal with some of that sin in our lives. And so the incarnation of that, the Emmanuel, is just massive. It's a game changer in my understanding.
But I think as well that's why it's important to retell the story, because this, from an evangelistic point of view, this is how we engage with society, isn't it? Through our festivals as well as through what we do. And this year, the way that we unpack the Christmas story for someone is they get it this time, whereas they didn't before. And it's an opportunity to kind of bring the reality of what Emmanuel means to people, and just unlock it for them. Because even if you've heard that, I don't know, other people like myself, lots of Christians that have, we've grown up with the Bible, but it took a long time for us to just kind of, this makes sense and we get it. And I think part of having that cycle of retelling the story and finding different ways to do it and different things to focus on is that's the real why. It's not just religion for religious sake. It's this time of year we have to do this kind of thing. It's because it is a useful tool for mission, like evangelism. And
I think going back to my job title role thing, like in my reading about intergenerational stuff, one of the ways that people have seen real strong connection between young people who stay connected to the story, not necessarily the church, because that's the institution, but the story and faith, is by the retelling of the story. The communities of faith that do that best have the highest retention level. Now, I don't. That's probably
it's a dirty word.
That's probably a bit clumsy. But as we live out the story and retell the story, and I used to think that as an adult teaching young people that I had knowledge and I was passing that knowledge on. What I reflect now is actually as I told the story and gave my thoughts on it, and young people are brilliant at challenging anything they think is clumsy or whatever, that you actually know the story better yourself. So I would argue not just about this story, but how do we tell the story of the gospel in that way. So yes, so there's loads to me why and having a dedicated period of time when you prepare for Christmas is quite interesting. It strikes me as slightly odd that the radio stations and shops and whatever will go Christmas mad up until Christmas Day, and then it's like Christmas is gone. Whereas actually in our world, Advent is between now and Christmas.
Yes.
And Christmas starts on the 25th of December and goes through to whatever, the 5th, 6th of this January, that's Christmas. That's the season. And so, yeah, anyway, without working too much on that. But there's
that's
yeah.
Great. So I'd just like to summarize that point. Yes, we do gain a lot from reading the Christmas story year on year. It just depends on the quality of the preacher.
Oh man, I'm the last one in Advent.
Well, I've set the bar low, Jason. You're all right, so you're fine.
No, that's great.
Right.
Yeah.
And I saw something interesting. Like, so obviously we started Advent on Sunday, the 28th of November. Lots of people are starting Advent today, right? And you can get into a big theological, which is the right one. For me, it's all about the heart of it. What are you really looking for? And I did something unusual. I have got a coffee machine where you put pods in it. So my Advent calendar this year is a pod of coffee a day.
Oh,
so
lovely.
I'm gonna be super excited by Christmas Day, maybe. But I think we need. Are we allowing Emmanuel with us in this season? Not just this Advent season, but this COVID world we're living in right now. Omicron coming, which was an unwelcome guest, as it were. What does that look like? Where does our faith fit within it?
And I think that's going to be, we're going to be talking about that more and more in the coming weeks, aren't we? But hey, that's, hopefully we'll get to do some more Advent. We had a big gap between the last one and this one because we realised we had loads of weeks where we were chock full of stuff to do or weren't around, whatever. But I've not checked next week, but hopefully we'll be able to do a few more in the run up to Christmas and chat through some more of these big Advent ideas, because they are, it's big things, and it's it's a big, I don't say story, but it's a big event, isn't it? There's a lot going on, a lot to unpack, a lot of I don't want to say characters, but a lot of characters to grapple with and understand. But
and as you said, Tizz, it's an important time because we as Christians are the reason for pointing towards Emmanuel. We are that signpost, really.
I really thought you were going to say reason for the season then.
That's the strapline for our services, isn't it?
I was going to say, do you have like a bingo game? Programs, and are people at home crossing out phrases? But in my own church, we bought a load of stuff from CPO to do with like advertising. It was a very simple God is with us. It was a simple, probably theologically inaccurate stable with the phrase God is with us. And we delivered those around, and I delivered a few of them. And, interesting conversation can happen because people are slightly more open to that conversation. And we particularly went with this God is with us. Like, he's not absent. He's not far away. So which song are you doing next then? Do you know which song somebody's looking at this Sunday? Oh, sorry, maybe I should have.
Psalm song this Sunday.
The Psalmist's song.
Psalmist song, and then Shepherd's song.
You can't.
And then the People's song. That's you, Jason. Have you written it yet?
Of course I haven't. Yes, the Psalmist's song, which I've not got a clue. I mean, Gareth knows what he's doing, so we'll see what happens. It's I think it's quite intriguing. So we'll see. Yeah. Right. Well, we should go. I can hear a screaming child to go and wrangle. So hopefully bedtime is not going too badly. But I'll do what I normally do and end with a prayer, I guess, if that's okay. Super. Yeah. Father God, we thank you for the message that you brought to us on Sunday through Tizz. We thank you for Tizz and his work across the district, and we thank you for this magnificent song from Mary, and these powerful words. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to understand what they mean for us, to understand what they meant for Mary, and hopefully, well, grow closer to you through that, Lord. I pray that as in the run up to Advent, as we are preparing for spiritually for your arrival, that we would find time to ponder what it means, Lord, that you are with us. Amen.
Amen. Great. Thanks for joining us, Tizz. Thanks for your message.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
And thanks for folks for watching.
Yes, thank you. We'll be back soon, and hopefully Tizz will have you on again somewhere when you're next down or away.
Looking.
Thanks so much. Right, I'll hit
Cheers.
the button. Bye.